Welcome.
Thank you.
We had asked Gail Sinclair to speak back before the pandemic, and she was doing a talk on her book, the book she's co-authored, about the 100 greatest fictional characters in literature. And then the pandemic came, and we all thought it'd be over, and we're finding another way to have this discussion.
Well, Marquita, we scheduled her again in July and had to cancel again.
I know. So this time we're doing it this way. There were some handouts sent with lists on an email. So if you've read them, it gives you a step up on it. Gail is president, was executive director of the Winter Park Institute, Hemingway scholar and a Fitzgerald scholar, and English professor at Rollins. The only professor I've ever heard of that rereads the book she's teaching every time she teaches it. My teachers never did that. So you get a very different perspective. We've known each other in excess of 30 years and been to each other's children's birthday parties and weddings, and now grandchildren are here. So Gail now has a granddaughter to play with, tiny one.
I do.
They're so much fun. But I'm going to turn it over to Gail and let her give her presentation, and then we'll ask questions if that's all right.
Okay, sounds great. Well, I just got off another webinar from the Fitzgerald Society. We've been talking about Tender is the Night, so this is a very literary afternoon for me. And I taught my first course of the fall last night, so I've been very well enmeshed in literature. So thank you for persisting with getting me here. Third time's a charm, and I really am delighted to be here. To talk about this book, The 100 Greatest Literary Characters. I have it sitting next to me because I keep forgetting the title of it. You'd think you'd remember the title of your own book, but I keep forgetting, literary or fictional or whatever. But anyway, I'm always happy to talk about it. So I'll give you a little bit of background about the three of us who authored the book. Jim Plath was the original author of the book. I don't know whether it was his idea or if the publisher came to him, but he was going to do all 100 characters, which just sounds like an enormous task. And he discovered that he had cancer, and in fighting the cancer, which he has beaten, he really felt too tired to write the book himself, and asked if I would be interested in doing 50 characters. And I said, no, I wouldn't be. It's too much. I had a full-time job, and most of you know my husband, who has multiple jobs, and I follow him around on those, and you know, a busy life. And so I said no. A few months later, I ran into Jim at a Fitzgerald conference, and he asked again, and I said no again, and only if we considered having a third writer, so that we each did a third of the book. And so we brought on a good friend of both of ours, Kirk, Curnutt. We've all been friends for many years. I met Jim, believe it or not, on the sidewalk along the banks of the Seine, which isn't as random as it sounds. We both happened to be at the Fitzgerald Hemingway conference in Paris in 1994. And we obviously looked like Americans. Americans always look like Americans in Paris. And so we said, are you at the conference? Yes, are you? And so we started talking. And then Kirk and I were co-directors of the International Hemingway Conference in Key West in 2004. And so we've all been friends a long time and going to these conferences together. And that's how we came to write the book together. The book is in a series that Rowman and Littlefield has about the 100 top this and that. You've all read lists, top 100 novels, top 100, of anything. And so, I assume that most of you are here tonight because you are lovers of literature. And I was thinking about, I haven't seen a list, top 100 plots. we are obviously interested in plots in books, but the plots are revealed through the characters. So it was really interesting to work on these characters and to discuss what made them interesting. Just to quote a little bit from the introduction of the book, the first thing that makes a reader read a book is the character. Behind every great book is a great character. And as Gabriel Garcia Marquez reminds us, in every novel, the character is a collage of different characters that you've known or heard about or read about. And they are what is memorable about the book. So how do you go about choosing 100 characters from all the characters? I think there was something like 130 million books published overall and almost 300,000 books a year. So there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of characters. So we looked, of course, at the time-honored characters, those characters who appeared on everybody's list. You always see Jay Gatsby, you're always going to see Ahab, you're going to see characters like Ebenezer Scrooge and other characters that are just about everybody recognizes as a character that is memorable and will always be memorable. We also looked at characters who were known in the general population, not just we book nerds, but that anybody might know or recognize. We looked at characters who influenced other characters or writers to create characters that were similar. And we looked at characters not only who were loved for all time, but we looked at characters who were hated because they were so evil. Ultimately, Ahab, or someone like that as a villain. So we came up with maybe 40 or 50 that we all agreed on, and we kind of divvied up among ourselves who's going to take what. I ended up with a lot of the female characters, not because they hadn't read the female characters or I hadn't read the male, but just that I sort of gravitated toward those. And I also ended up with some of the traditional ones. Both Jim and Kirk were more avant-garde than I am in terms of their literary taste. So we've got the girl with the dragon tattoo, and we've got Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones and that kind of thing. They're much better at the more contemporary than I was. But then once we got the traditional characters and some of the characters that we think may become traditional. They're not icons yet, but they probably will be. Then we each made some choices for ourselves. I chose Tessa of the D'Urbervilles, which is a character that many of you may not know. I also chose Scarlett O'Hara, not because Gone with the Wind is a great classic book. Maybe some people would consider it that, but just because she's a fascinating character. So we got our list of 33 characters and we started. It was quite a challenge because Jim had the contract for a long time and hadn't worked on it because of his illness, and so we were all down to about 2 months to get 33 characters each. And so I sat in a chair from 6 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night, many days in a row working. Writing a book is hard work. It's just hard work, but it was also great fun because we were working with these fascinating characters. And it was fun because it wasn't a research type of thing where we went to the dusty old academic libraries and looked up all of these critical tomes about these characters. We did a lot of Googling. And what I discovered is I love journalistic writing because you got to get the reader's attention quickly. You've got to get the facts out there. You got to get interesting stuff so you keep the attention of the reader. And so I just came to really appreciate good journalistic writing, and I did a lot of Googling of characters, and I found a lot of interesting stuff. Some of it made it in the book and some of it didn't. Things about characters that I didn't know, and it was a really fun book to write, even though, as I said, writing is hard. But there are gaps. And each of you, if you've had a chance to look at the list, will say, well, why wasn't, for example, I got an email, why wasn't Jake Barnes, from Hemingway, and why wasn't this character or that character? And there are a number of reasons. We agreed that we wouldn't have more than one character per book. So, for example, Huck Finn is obviously going to be the central character of the Adventures of Huck Finn, but Jim is just a wonderful character. So I almost think there should be a second book that is secondary characters, the best 100 secondary characters. I know I wrote about Ma Jode, and we argued amongst ourselves, the three of us, about who should be in there. And Kirk wanted Tom Jode, but he already had a bunch of characters chosen, and I had, my list was less full. And so I said, well, I'd be happy to write about the Grapes of Wrath, but I don't want to write about Tom Jode. I want to write about Ma Jode because she's just fascinating to me. So I did that. And interestingly, when we were finished, the editors asked us each to come up with our top 10, and that's a list I sent out if you got a chance to look at that. So when Kirk originally wrote his list, he had Tom Jode, and I said, Tom Jode didn't make it, Ma Jode made it. So had to change the list, and so we had friendly discussions, disagreements about the characters. We also decided that if we were writing a prototype, a character type, like a detective, we wouldn't write a bunch of them, although we do have Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot, but oftentimes we try not to do a whole bunch of the same type. And as I said already, characters didn't have to be good, they could be bad. So that's the general background of the book, and how characters came to be there or not. Absolutely, readers will argue about people that we shouldn't have put in that we did, and people that we left out. So that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to, is having that discussion with you. So the question is, do you want to just ask questions? Would you like me to read a couple of the characters that I did and then have conversation? How would you like to proceed?
Gail, they're all muted, so I'm just going to invite anybody that has an answer for her to unmute yourself and then remute.
I would say read if you.
Okay. All right. Well, rather than, if I were doing this in person, I had filled out something to pass out and let people check off, and then I was going to make a decision. But since that wasn't possible, I just decided to read, I would take the top two on my list. So the top one on my list is Hester Prynne, a character that all of you probably had to read in high school. And when I taught high school, which I did for many years, I had my students read it as well, much as they might have hated it. But so this is my chapter on Hester Prynne. And each of these chapters started with a quote from the book that we chose. So the quote I chose is, "Why are we taught to be ashamed of love? Old classics never die. They just keep haunting high school English classes, as students might testify of Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, published in 1850. Contemporary readers often find the language only a tad less antiquated than Shakespeare's, and on its surface, the novel seems to have little in common with 21st century teenagers, except perhaps the topic of unwanted pregnancy and the havoc it wreaks on one's social life. So why make them read the book? Because Hester Prynne is one of the rock stars of fiction, that's why, and she needs no qualifiers on a ranked list. As one website recently put it, Hester is our homegirl. This phrase may not translate well a century from now, but the qualities that make Hester an enduring figure certainly will. As Hester emerges from a 17th century Boston prison at the novel's opening carrying a 3-month-old child, she exudes dignity and grace in the face of all that would rob her of both. Much to the surprise of the dour townspeople who expect to see a broken woman, her statuesque figure and stunning beauty make a halo of misfortune and ignominy in which she was enveloped. Sorry, I always stumble on that word. And that's a quote by Hawthorne, a halo of the misfortune and ignominy. I'll never get it right the first time. In which she was enveloped. Hawthorne sure knows how to embellish a phrase, doesn't he? Hesper's beauty has not only withstood the months of dismal incarceration, she has transcended her punishment. And the narrator goes so far as to say that if a stray papist were to be wandering in this Puritan burg, he might be reminded of the Madonna herself holding the Holy Child. Not bad for an adulterous woman clutching the object of her sin to her breast. Emblazoned upon the chest of her simple Puritan frock, Hester Prynne has attached a fantastically embroidered scarlet A, sure to draw attention. That letter, forever linked to her, has become arguably one of the three most identifiable symbols in all of literature, in company with Gatsby's green light and the white whale Moby Dick. We are never told in the novel, nor do we need to be, that Hester has committed adultery. The proof is evident for all to see, because she has lived unaccompanied by her husband for the past 2 years. What is equally clear is that Hester takes the nearly intolerable walk of shame, head held high, and with a muted but almost haughty look of self-possession. Her body language validates acceptance of the punishment without apology for the crime. So why in the mid-19th century does Hawthorne create this 17th century narrative of female woe? As a matter of possible historical inspiration, in 1845, his friend and fellow transcendentalist Margaret Fuller published her feminist work, Woman in the 19th Century. And in 1848, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton held the first women's rights conference. If we are to believe the novel's preference, the Custom House, we know that Hawthorne's literary persona discovers a package bearing the red A, along with a narrative relaying the curious circumstances of a woman's life. This seems a contrived authentication for a tale he is about to weave, but we do know that Hawthorne's great-great-grandfather, John Haythorne, had been a judge at the Salem witch trial, one of America's darkest hours of disgrace and wrongful accusation. And the younger Hawthorne was presumably ashamed enough to change the spelling of his name to diminish the connection. If we believe Hawthorne's personal shame, we understand more fully his deep-seated need to make Hester a sympathetic figure. Her years of penance become steadily more self-induced than forced upon her. She silently points to the letter to remind the passerby not to sully themselves through association with her. She shuns all social interaction, but administers mercy to those in need. Hester tolerates cruel censure for an act she did not commit alone, and she protects the identity of the two men who continue to wrong her. The husband who mysteriously appears the day of her public shaming and demands silence so he can secretly exact slow torture upon the man who cuckolded him, and the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale, who wallows in his own guilt and at not acknowledging his paternity and complicity. Because of Hester's honorable response to her punishment, fellow Bostonians come to believe the Scarlet Letter means Abel or angel, and in the end we might only find fault with her, not for the act of adultery, but for her failure to denounce both her husband for his cruel and silent revenge and her lover for his cowardice and self-absorption. The history of public humiliation, and this is where one of the things we did was to, and sorry, my computer seems like it's making some noise overheating here, so I'm going to try to give it some air. One of the things we did in these was not just to talk about the story itself, but to talk about contemporary context. So this is what's happening here. The history of public humiliation no doubt goes back as far as the chronicling of human nature, but from Hawthorne's novel forward, Hester and the Scarlet Letter have become synonymous with using such sentencings not to punctuate a crime so much as to humiliate the perpetrator. With all too frequent regularity, newspaper headlines echo Hester's Scarlet Letter, with judges ordering convicted defendants to stand in public holding a sign describing their transgressions. Florida even had on its books until 2002 the so-called Scarlet Letter Law, requiring unwed pregnant women to publish names of their sexual partners, as potential fathers might be identified before babies could be put up for adoption. Can you imagine scouring the newspapers to see names? But through all this discussion of sin, we neglect an important element in Hester. She is a young and beautiful woman, capable of deep physical and emotional passion. However ill-advised, her love for Arthur Dimmesdale extends presumably beyond the grave, though with his dying breath he robs her of even this hope by declaring the vanity of such ignominious thoughts. Remaining true to him and to her own nature, Hester gets the last word and returns to the scene of the crime to be buried next to the man whom she now let disavow her, whom she would not let disavow her even in death. Almost done. John Updike, at first glance, might be an unlikely source for discussion about Hester Prynne, but he found her so inescapable to a contemporary discussion of sex that he wrote a 20th century revisionist trilogy, one book for each of the titles, each of the three central characters. Where in Hester's updated tale, the title is simply S, evoking the connection. Updike reminds us that Hester is a sexual being, irrepressible, and a mythic version of every woman's attempt to integrate her sexuality with societal demands. Such a tribute speaks to the engagement Hawthorne's Mistress Prynne continues to create as a symbol in our cultural psyche. And the last paragraph, more than 4 centuries dead in historic context and more than a century and a half since her fictional debut, Hester still haunts us. Her unjust punishment resonates. Her desire to be understood and accepted for who she is and not identified only for what she has done tugs at our own personal episodes of mistreatment. No doubt far less severe, but wounding nonetheless. And above all else, the dignity with which Hester bears the incongruity is the true example Hawthorne sets. In The Scarlet Letter, Hester claims, "This badge has taught me, it daily teaches me." And the beauty is that it can daily teach us as well the lessons of tolerance and forgiveness not always found or practiced. I think maybe only reading one is enough because even though it's only 1,200 words, it takes a bit of time to read, and nobody wants to just sit and listen to me read. But it gives you a flavor of each chapter. They're 10 minutes to read, so it's a great bedtime nightstand book. Read a chapter and fall asleep. But the characters range. We also have, I know I did a chapter on Peter Pan, which was quite fun. And one of the startling things that I found out in doing my research for that one was that the original book, and we use the books, not movies and so forth, but the original book, Peter was a 7-day-old baby who somehow crawled out the window and went to Kensington Garden to play with the fairies. And when he came back, his mother had closed the window and he couldn't get in. So, and she replaced him with another baby. So he goes off to Never Never Land. I found all kinds of interesting facts about these books and these characters in doing my research, and it was great fun. I wish I could share all of them with you, but I guess I can if you get the book. But we're how many minutes in? Oh, not quite 30 minutes in. I'll open it up to questions, or I'll read one more if you like. Again, your pleasure.
I've got a question.
Okay.
I see that Dickens gets 3 and Agatha Christie gets 2. Were you surprised that there weren't more authors that had more than one character that made the list?
Again, I think we tried not to do too many from the same author. Actually, Agatha Christie got 2 because the publisher wanted us to add Mrs. Marple, which we hadn't put in.
Really?
So sometimes it was, there were several that were too strong not to put in, and sometimes it was the publisher whose book it was. So we bowed to the publisher. I'd be curious about characters that are missing from the book that someone thinks is just a travesty that we left that particular character out.
I was looking for Sidney Carton. I was going, it's a far, far better thing I do than I've ever done. I mean,
and the title of the book
was A Tale of Two Cities.
Yes. Well, it's Dickens, and we already had Oliver Twist and Ebenezer Scrooge, so that would have made us Dickens heavy.
And I'd sort of like to ask a question if I can.
Sure. Dick
Umler, am I on?
You are.
Okay. I noticed Holden Caulfield is on the list, but he's not on any one of your 10 lists.
Right.
And I have interviewed students for my application, students applying to my college for years and years and years. And I try to get them around to discussing their readings in their books. And I cannot tell you, even though that book was written in the 50s, how many students bring it up and how they relate to or mention Holden Caulfield. Now, I know you taught high school English for years, so
Right.
so I don't know, but I just kind of thought maybe he might make one of those 10 lists.
Well, I think
Yeah.
Holden Caulfield is such an iconic figure for a certain age reader. We all read Catcher in the Rye when we were younger, and I found him compelling. I'm kind of smiling because I remember taking a class where they came up with some different titles, and one of the alternate titles for an alternate book to Catcher in the Rye was Catch Her in the Oatmeal. Which I found funny. But I think it's because, the three of us writing the book are now of a certain age, and Holden Caulfield, while he's a great, great character, he is of a certain age and appeals to a certain age as well. So that's probably why he didn't make our top 10 list. That was a hard list to write, a really hard list to write, to choose your top 10 favorite characters. And we actually, all three of us had Hester Prynne, which is one of the reasons why I read my chapter on Hester Prynne. I think we all had Jay Gatsby. And again, all three of us are Fitzgerald and Hemingway scholars, so there's no surprise there. It's kind of surprising that I think only one of us is Santiago on here. I don't even see him. So, we had characters that meshed the three of us, and then we had characters that only one of us had. So it speaks to personal taste. But I think for Holden Caulfield, it's the age thing.
Gail, you may have already answered this, but which character, if you could only choose one more, if this was 101 like the Dalmatians instead of 100, who would you have added?
Oh, that's a great question, and nobody's asked me that. Who would I have added? I'm sure it would have been a female character. Although, well, I'm not sure, because as I'm thinking about it, who pops into my mind is Rochester from Jane Eyre. But I'll come back to you in a day or two because I'd have to go through so many. But I'll just turn the question back on you. Who would you add?
No.
Is there one missing there that you might add?
You put a lot of time into selecting these characters, and usually when you do that, somebody gets left on the cutting floor that you didn't want left there, and I just wondered if there was one in particular that stood out.
Well, there was a character that I think should have been there. I was introduced to reading by my mother, and my mother loved the Laura Ingalls Wilder series, and I thought Laura Ingalls Wilder should have been a character in the book. Also, probably Nancy Drew should have been a character. So they were characters that harken back not to my youth, but to my parents, my mother's youth, and so they got left on the cutting room floor, and I felt like they probably should have been, if not in the book, they should be, in the next iteration.
Well, I'll still be interested when you send me that email with the one.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be interested when I come up with that too.
Okay.
And I'm glad you asked the question. Now I'll be ready for it another time.
This is more an editorial question than a literary one.
Uh-huh.
How did you end up with 100? You must have had duplicates among the three of you. How did you resolve those?
Well, we sat down when we all three agreed to do the book. We were at a conference, a Fitzgerald conference in Minneapolis. And so we literally sat in the room together and started hashing out the ones that we absolutely had to have, and who was going to take which one. And then we just emailed back and forth, and
Oh,
and
you kept in touch as your list grew.
right. Well, and
I
we did some FaceTime. This was pre-pandemic, so we weren't all Zooming each other like we are now. Uh, but we're all great friends, and we just would get on email or we'd get on a phone call and say, okay, here's my revised list. What do you think? And then we'd scratch through and add again, and then as I said, we were all finished, and the publisher said, well, wait a minute, you don't have Hercule Poirot, you don't have Miss Marple. And I had a couple that I wrote that ended up not being used after all. We had Peter Pan, we had Alice in Wonderland. So I wrote Cinderella, and that was a fun one to do. And the editor said, no, we don't want Cinderella. So I was searching around for someone else, and I thought, well, Forrest Gump is a really interesting character. But I really only knew the movie, not the book. So I started, and then I started investigating the book, and I wrote on Forrest Gump, and was quite surprised that the Forrest Gump in the book is not Forrest Gump in the movie at all. He's not a very desirable character in a lot of ways. He's a very odd character, but I pushed through because it was the last one, and I wanted to just do it. So I did it, and they decided, no, we didn't want Forrest Gump. And so we ended up with Anna Karenina, who originally wasn't in the book, though certainly should have been, but we had Madame Bovary, and we had said, well, we don't want to have a bunch of the same character types, so let's not have a bunch of women who kill themselves. Madame Bovary maybe is enough, but the editor said you really have to have Anna Karenina, so she got added at the end. But there was a lot of jockeying back and forth about who to put in, who not to put in, and who was going to take which character. Yes.
I listened to a thing on the English novel, one of those great lecture series on it. And one of the things they talked about was the first English novel they considered was Pamela. And the reason they thought it was because it was all of a sudden you had a unique character. Before that, they said people were sort of stereotypes or sort of heroes or something. And that was considered the first English novel. But I wondered, how did you then decide with a character? That was in the 1740s, I believe, that book.
Right. Pamela, and then there was one called Shamala that came after that.
Okay. And I was just wondering, how did you have sort of like they had to have a number of unique characteristics, or how did you determine who would be I guess it's just your favorite character versus your maybe unique characters. I was just wondering how you determined.
Well, and sorry for the jockeying around. My computer is still making this noise like it's overheating. So if I suddenly disappear, it's that my computer has blown up. Because as I said, I was sitting here listening to a webinar for an hour before this, so it's kind of tired. But we were looking for a variety, which is why we didn't include several of the same sort of genre type characters. And we were looking for characters that you couldn't forget, that they stayed with you, and oftentimes they were tragic characters. So, for example, Tess of the D'Urbervilles was one that I chose. I suspect many of you don't know Tess of the D'Urbervilles. It's a novel by Thomas Hardy, and it's just a tragic character. It ends tragically, it ends sadly, and her life haunted me. So I chose her as a character that I thought people didn't know but should know. And so there are some of those. There are always characters. It's like a movie. There's a sleeper movie that people don't know but they should know. And the same is true with books and with characters. So you have to take the obvious characters, the great, the top 10 or top 20 or whatever. And someone like Ahab, there's a tragic character, and you can't read that book. Well, first of all, you can hardly read the book. It's a difficult book, I think, to read, but you can't read that book without having reactions about Ahab. Hate him, feel sorry for him, whatever emotions you have. you have responses to who he is and how he acts. So we tried to choose characters that a lot of people had responses to. And then we wanted to choose characters that we wanted other people to know that didn't know, that were great. Just because they weren't known didn't mean they weren't great characters. Does that answer?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, I have another suggestion for Diana. Once we're able to have dinners again, maybe we all dress up as our favorite character and come in.
That happens a lot in Jane Eyre. There's a Jane Eyre society, and they dress up all the time. Not Jane Eyre. Sorry, Jane Austen. What I meant to say. So this Jane Austen society. I have a friend who is a Hemingway scholar also, but she's also very active in the Jane Austen Society. She's always putting pictures on Facebook of their dressing up. And I have. If people ask me what's your favorite novel, it's like asking what's your favorite child. It's a question you shouldn't ask an English professor. But I do have an answer. There are two, not one. My two, not necessarily favorite novels, but books I wish I had written. And they are The Great Gatsby and To Kill a Mockingbird. So The Great Gatsby is one of those also that people are always dressing. People love to dress up like the 1920s.
Yeah.
So it's, I have an actual 1920s silk long coat that a friend of mine forced me to buy at an antique store, and so I haul that out, even though it's threadbare in some places at this point. But I get out my close hat and my.
Well, there you go. We'll have that party, Gail, and you'll wear that dress.
Well,
those things too.
It's been dragged out more than once. Poor little dress, but.
Gail,
Yes.
you mentioned To Kill a Mockingbird, and I've been saying I have a couple of offbeat questions about that. I mean, Atticus Finch is probably my favorite character of the books I've read. And I read the book before I saw the movie, the one with Gregory Peck. And the first question is, what did you think about the casting with Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch?
The movie is fantastic. In fact, if we have time at the end, I'll read my Atticus Finch chapter. And I say that really, once you've seen the movie, you can't see Atticus Finch without seeing Gregory Peck's face. He is the penultimate Atticus Finch, absolutely. And the girl who played Scout was perfect. And it's one of the few film adaptations of a book that I think is beautifully done. I've never once seen a good adaptation of The Great Gatsby. And I've thought about it many times. Why isn't there a good film of The Great Gatsby? And I think it's because one of the things that I love about The Great Gatsby is Fitzgerald's propensity with language. He's a poet. His language is just beautiful in that book. Nowhere else is beautiful in any of his other writing as it is in that book. And a lot of what is beautiful about the book is his discussion that is not action. So how do you put that in a movie? It's authorial conversation, not plot. And it doesn't translate well to a movie. They've tried. But it just doesn't work. Whereas with the film version of To Kill a Mockingbird, really they just focus on the action and the dialogue. And it's a beautiful film, and probably the best book to film adaptation, in my opinion. And then you had a second question.
Yeah, the other question was, there's a more contemporary book, Grisham, A Time to Kill. I don't know if you've read that. It's very similar. It has a lawyer, and there's some racial connotations. So I was just going to ask if you compared Atticus to, I think it was Jake Brigance or something like that. But
I have, it's frustrating for me because as Marquita said, I try to read the books when I teach them. And so when you have to do that, and then I'm trying to read critical books and so forth, I have so little time to read. When I was working on my degree and I was traveling back and forth to University of South Florida in Tampa, I listened to books on tape in the car, and that was a great way to get what I call the Oprah books in my head, or the books that I was about to teach. I would get them back in my head. But to sit down and read, I read on planes, which isn't happening right now. I read at the beach, which isn't happening right now either. So I've got a ways to go. But I would ask a question tied to Kill a Mockingbird, and I can't see everybody see a show of hands, but how many people have read Ghost Set a Watchman, which is the book that came out. Harper Lee had written one book prior to her death, and after she died, Ghost Set a Watchman came out. I have to confess, I have not read the book, and I didn't read it on purpose because I listened to critics who read it, and it was the book that she originally wrote, and the publisher said, no, we're not going to publish this, go back and redo. And so what she wrote then was To Kill a Mockingbird, which is set earlier. She wrote it, it was her second book, but she published it first. And Ghost Set a Watchman is like 20 years later, and Atticus Finch is against desegregation, and he actually even goes to a KKK meeting. And I said, no, don't tell me. I don't want to know that. And so I just have chosen not to read the book because I don't want, and if we have time, as I said, I'll read the Atticus Finch, and Peggy Noonan talks about that.
Did she not try to keep that from being published until after her death?
She had it locked away in the safe. Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about posthumous publication.
I'm not sure she wanted it to be published.
Right. First of all, it was rejected to begin with, and it's a negative, at least somewhat negative, and I'm speaking again not from having read it, but just knowing about it. If a writer chooses not to publish something, I think we should listen to them. Hemingway had at least 4 books come out posthumously. Obviously, he knew publishers, so if he had chosen to publish those, he could have done so, but he didn't. Fitzgerald's last novel, The Last Tycoon, he wasn't finished writing. Someone finished it for him. That's complicated and problematic. So I think Harper Lee chose not to. She did make me happy in that I've predicted for years and years that she had other writing that she just wasn't publishing, and so yay, I was right about that prediction, but sadly it's not the book. The reason why I thought she didn't publish is because if you write the perfect book, which I think To Kill a Mockingbird is, where do you have to go but down from there? It was an instant success. It was a Pulitzer Prize winner. It's taught in most either middle schools or high schools. It was the perfect book. How can you top it? Which obviously she couldn't.
When you were putting together your list, did you try to vary the decade or the century they were written in? Was that a conscious decision to have a balance? Or
it was.
In time frame, so it wasn't all books in one time frame.
Right. We have. We don't go earlier. Like Pamela, which was mentioned earlier, was really a very old book. But we have very contemporary works. As I said, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Game of Thrones. We have
Harry Potter,
James Bond,
mm-hmm.
And so we have, I think, a broad smattering from various ages. All 3 of us are modern literature scholars. We all publish in Hemingway, Fitzgerald. Jim Plath is the president of the John Updike Society, so he is versed on postmodern or contemporary writers much more than I am. So we all acknowledged our bias. We're all American lit, modern lit scholars. So we tried hard not to get stuck too much in that period and to be broad-based as much as we could.
Gail, how did Katniss Everdeen make this list?
I'm trying to remember if it was Jim Plath or Kirk. I think it was Jim, who is you know, he loves all of, like he likes the Marvel comic characters, and he likes the more contemporary books. So I have to confess, I haven't read those books. I've seen the films, but I hadn't read the books. As I said earlier, I'm much more of a literary traditionalist than the two guys are. So anything that was not on the traditional literary list usually got dumped on one of their two lists.
Go ahead.
Actually, they wanted to.
Gail, I had a question for you. First of all, thank you for being at the Hemingway book club yesterday. And I have to say that after hearing you, I cannot wait to pick up this book. I'm going to order it as soon as we finish with Is Me. I'm going to go ahead and order it, and I can't wait to get started on it. But in the context of that, I see that a lot of these characters are what we would call classic literature characters.
Right.
And when I put out this book club, a lot of people said, well, you know, so many of these things are obsolete. Hemingway is obsolete because he's a sexist. Willa Cather is obsolete because she's a racist. And I see you have Captain Ahab. Ahab, that was considered, you know, passe because, you know, killing a whale, you know, that the whole concept. We're in a different world now. And I wondered, in the context of these characters, is it appropriate, or is it something that characters do become obsolete, even if it's a well-written book, it's a classic work of literature? Can they be obsolete because our ideas have changed over a period of time?
Well, that's a great question, and it sets the stage for the English professor in me, which is to say that a great character is timeless. The period in which the character lives may not be. Hunting whales is something we don't do any longer. But I'm not interested in the whale hunting aspects. In fact, I am just, you know, how many chapters can you read about boiling down whale blubber, you know, before you just can't stand it anymore? But a good character is timeless, I think, and can be taken out of time and space. The character might be genderless also, and I don't mean they're not male or female, but that it doesn't matter whether they're male or female because you're looking at the characteristics. But certainly time and space is not significant. It is a character that has human qualities that we can all relate to. Are we lonely? Do we want love? Do we feel abused and misunderstood? You know, all of those qualities that anybody, no matter what race you are, no matter what gender you are, no matter what time period you are from, you can relate to. I'm also of the mind that we shouldn't erase negative history. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be tearing down Confederate statues. I don't want to go there one way or the other, but we shouldn't hide under the covers negative history because we can learn from negative history. And I taught The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn when we lived in Texas. I taught it in a classroom that had 50% minority and 50% white. And I started the first day of teaching The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by putting the N-word on the board, because you're going to see that word in there throughout the novel. So I put it on the board and I said, you're going to see this word over and over and over. It's absolutely a pejorative word that we will never use in a pejorative way in this classroom, but it is in the book, and you need to understand that Twain's use of it was common. He's using what was commonly used, and it means slave, but again, a pejorative word in our contemporary society, even though it was used very regularly there in that society. And I also said, when we get to the end of the book, you will see that Jim, the one black character in the novel, is the kindest, most selfless character in the entire novel. And you will see Twain's critique of slavery. Now, there are critics who argue, well, yes, but there are all these other things. But I think that there are, if you look at novels that are popular in their own time versus novels that withstand the test of time, some of the most popular books in their own time are totally lost to people's lists. They've never heard of them. Some musicians, the same. I think Bach was not very popular in his time, and look at him now, that kind of thing. So I think that there are characters who are just bad characters, and they don't stand the test of time. But I don't think, Hemingway and Hemingway's likes may not be contemporary, though you'd be surprised how popular Hemingway is still. And as I said yesterday, I don't like Hemingway the man in a lot of ways, but I can still read his books and find that depth of character and so forth. So I think a good book is a good book is a good book and will always be a good book, not because of the setting, but because of the character. To defend what I said earlier, which is that we read books, yes, we like the plot and we remember the plot, but it's really the characters inside the plot that is what draws us through the book.
Gail, would you say that political correctness has no place in literature?
I wouldn't be as definitive as that, because I think, I'm a person who believes that we should not be offensive, and we should try to be inclusive. But if you're telling a story about a particular character, you have to portray the character for who he or she is. And if it's a vile character, then you have to portray that vileness. I think that would be the point, wouldn't it? For a writer to say this is a vile character, and here are the things about him or her that become vile. So I think literature has an obligation to look under the covers and to bring out into the open the negative and the positive, and it isn't always going to be politically correct. But as a literature professor, I would critique those elements. What's wrong with this character, or what's wrong with this situation, and why would we not sanction this character or this the way this character behaves?
Gail, Tim and I used to live in a part of Maryland that it was a very big Jewish area. So we saw Schindler's List in a theater with Holocaust survivors, some with tattoos. It was an incredible experience. But I came out of that, and this relates to what you're saying, because I came out of that very confused as to whether Schindler was a good person or a bad person. He was a very complex person, and I don't think that it serves any of us to not learn that lesson, that there's something good in some of these characters with a foul language. There's something bad in some of the characters that look like angels. We are complex individuals, and when a character is realistic enough to be that complex, I appreciate it.
Yes. Sorry, I was running out of power here. Yes, absolutely. I think that the most interesting characters are those who are complex. John and I have been watching Game of Thrones, which is, I'm not going to make a lot of comment on it. I just thought, it came up that you could watch it suddenly, and it had been in the cultural context for so long. So I thought, well, I'm going to get it in my head. But we were talking last night as we were finishing one of the episodes, trying to get through the 500 of them, however many there are, that even the worst of characters, these murdering kings and so forth, you find moments where the king loves his daughter. He sacrifices her ultimately because he thinks it maybe is for the greater good, but he truly loves her. And the wicked queen who's willing to do anything truly loves her children, even though she's, So I think that this is what makes a character fascinating, is that, a character that is solely good or solely bad is boring. They're stock characters, and I don't like stock characters because you can predict them. You want them to be complex, because humanity is complex. We're, most of us, hopefully good most of the time, but we have our times when we aren't, and that is humanity. And it's interesting to me that so many writers are personally messed up. Most every modern writer I know was a drunkard, and oftentimes they go through many spouses, and they don't lead very happy lives, and yet they have a clarity about looking at characters, looking at humanity, and creating characters that understand humanity in ways that maybe the author might or might not understand. Sometimes I think authors understand more. I'm sorry, someone has just rung the doorbell and the dogs are going crazy. I was afraid that would happen. Nobody ever rings the doorbell, but so I think it's interesting that writers have a keen insight into humanity, but not necessarily their own lives. So many times, many writers are just confused, messed up people. But what the talent they have is sharing humanity in a way that we can see ourselves in a character, or see elements of ourselves in a character that makes us connected to that character. Or we see elements in a character, we say, "Oh my God, I hope I'm not like that person," and or that character.
Unmute, please.
Considering how many books are written with a religious theme, just glancing down this list, I don't see a single character that I would consider primarily a religious figure, such as Pilgrim and Pilgrim's Progress.
Pilgrim's Progress isn't actually it's more of a play, or moral tale. And so we didn't do plays because Roman and Littlefield is going to do a book on the top 100 plays or characters and so forth. But I'm trying to think who, besides Pilgrim and Pilgrim's Progress, who might we have put on that we didn't, that would fit that category for you. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of one that would be a character from a novel.
Yeah.
Frank, did you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, we had a hard time because there were a lot of characters in plays that we wanted to, Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, or John, what's his name in The Crucible, John Proctor, or, there were a lot of characters that we would put in, but they weren't the fiction genre.
I just wanted to say I really enjoyed this topic and the lecture, and I can't wait to start reading To Kill a Mockingbird again to see what a great hero the guy was. Thank you very much, Gail. I really appreciated it.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure for me to talk about literature. It's I forget what year of teaching this is for me. I haven't taught full time for a while because I was running the Winter Park Institute, but I have continued to teach through that. I teach now. I teach one course. I teach the great masterpieces of modern literature, which is right in my wheelhouse. So every week I get to talk about a different great novel and keep my hand in it. And I also will just put in a plug. I am vice president of the International Ernest Hemingway Society, and on the board, and I'm also on the board of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Society. And I don't say that to brag about those things, but to say that I would encourage any of you that are really interested in those two writers, and other societies have, or other writers have societies. I know there's a John Updike Society and a Jane Austen Society and so forth, but I can speak for the Hemingway and Fitzgerald Societies that we have hundreds of members, and in the Hemingway Society, at least half of the members are not academics. They are people who just love Hemingway, and you get journals, and we have conferences around the world. We meet in places where the writers lived or worked or set novels. And we sit around and talk about literature. If you love doing that, it's a great. Those are great societies. And I am so thrilled that the University Club continues to embrace these kinds of discussions and the book clubs and all of that. It's a wonderful, I think, community engagement. And I know John and I, most of you know my husband, John. John and I have been invited many times to talk about various authors and the things that we're doing, and we appreciate the fact that you appreciate the things that we're doing in the community. So I thank you very much for that. Many of you are familiar faces, and it's great to see you.
Gail, just one mention. I believe that there will be a PBS series on Hemingway by Ken Burns in the spring.
Yes.
Or maybe fall. I'm sorry.
2021. I think it's spring of 2021. He was here with the Winter Park Institute, and he and I talked about it. He was just getting started then, and he was interviewing Patrick Henry, who's the only living son of Hemingway, and the documentary is essentially put together. We had to cancel our Hemingway conference this summer, which was to be in Montana and Wyoming. But we had, Ken Burns wasn't there, but his two producers were, we had a webinar. They were supposed to have been at the conference, and we did a webinar instead. And I saw a clip of the Ken Burns Hemingway, about 10 minutes of it. It's great. It will be typical, wonderful Ken Burns work. And so I think it's spring of 21. But I'm not sure.
You met Hemingway's sister.
Yes, I did.
Go to Rollins?
She was a graduate of Rollins, and it's a really interesting story. I don't know how much time you have, but she was at Rollins from 1930 to 1931. She got kicked out for cohabitating with the man that she eventually married. But she came to, I asked her why she came to Rollins, and she came to Rollins because it was far away from Oak Park. She wanted to get away from her parents, and it was close to Ernest, who was in Key West. And I have a letter that she wrote to a friend saying, my English professor says Ernie won't amount to anything as a writer. So much for how much English professors know about talented writers. But anyway, yes, I got to interview her and have written about that. And just recently got a message, a Facebook message from the woman who bought Carol Hemingway's house, and she said, I found some photographs in a letter and wondered if you might be interested, and she sent me those on Facebook. So things still coming up about Carol Hemingway. But yes, she was at Rollins, and actually wrote a story here. The interesting stuff in the archives about her.
Well, I think if there are no more questions, I want to thank you for joining us. It's been great fun to see you.
Well, my pleasure. My pleasure.
After Gail got her PhD, I was singing in the church choir, and John came to rehearsal laughing. The phone had rung, and Kaylee, their daughter, answered, and they asked for Dr. Sinclair. And Kaylee goes, the good one or the other one?
Oh.
You just met the good one.
I want to adjust.
Okay, that's what he told us.
Yes. Well, he was wrong about that.
Okay, good.
He calls me the good Dr. Sinclair, which I don't correct him on. I let him do that. But the phone call actually was the person said, I wanted to speak to Dr. Sinclair, and Kaylee said, which one? And the person said, Dr. Sinclair, and she said, yes. Which one? I said, yay for my feminist girl. She was about 9 at the time.
Yeah.
You know, the assumption that well, obviously it has to be a male.
Yes.
You know, she was born a feminist, I think, and has remained so. So thanks for sharing that. That's always been a family story for us.
That's when he walked in and said, the good doctor, or the other one. That's how he phrased it.
Well, he fudged it a little bit, but the
That's
two stories
okay.
converge. They both are true in certain respects.
It was a good twist he put on it.
Right, it was. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure. Well, thank you, Gail. Really appreciate it. See you in a month or so.
Sounds great. Thank you again. It was my pleasure.